Well, hello and Happy New Year. It's Friday night, January 10th, 2014, and you're watching live on ABN Debate Night. I'm Chris Conway, and we are going to be sharing with you tonight for the next 90 minutes a debate between a non-Muslim and a Muslim to talk about the actual, the title of the program, the actual program title. The topic for tonight is what I'm trying to say is, did Muhammad exist? So I'm just going to get this program started off right away. First, I will introduce, by way of his bio, Imam Bashir Abdul Haqq will be our Muslim participant in tonight's event tonight, on this debate night. Imam Bashir Abdul Haqq started his Islamic studies at the early age of 16 and is now 34 years old. He has studied various Islamic schools of thought ranging from what would be considered Orthodox Islam and African Islamic empires, such as those in Mali and Timbuktu. He has not limited himself to Quranic studies, but rather he's a student of all knowledge, both religious and secular. At the age of 21, he became a member of the Amida Muslim community, where he studied the teachings of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, which he considers to be his master teacher for 13 years. In October 2012, our illustrious brother recognized the dire need to reform in the African American and minority communities in the United States of America, which led him to founding the organization called the Lions of Allah, the People's Organization. Imam Bashir Abdul Haqq is known as Babyface Imam because of his boyish looks, but there is nothing childish about him. Imam Bashir has held lectures and marches for justice across the Eastern Seaboard, and he is certainly an up-and-coming leader, teacher, and guide in America. And that was taken from Imam's website. So we welcome Imam to the program. Also, we will have Robert Spencer, a non-Muslim, participate in tonight's event. Robert has been to this program, number of our programs over the last number of years here at ABN and the Trinity Channel. Robert is the director of Jihad Watch, a program of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and the author of 13 books, including 2 New York Times bestsellers, The Truth About Muhammad and The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades, both by Regnery. The Chasm Between Christianity and Islam, The Catholic Answers. His next book, The Arab Winter Comes to America, The Truth About the War We're In, will be published in early 2014, this year, by Regnery Publishing. Spencer has led seminars on Islam and Jihad for the United States Central Command, United States Army Command, and General Staff College, the U.S. Army's Asymmetric Warfare Group, the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and the U.S. intelligence community. Spencer is Associate Director for the American Freedom Defense Initiative at the AFDI, and he is a weekly columnist on PJ Media and Front Page Magazine, and has written 11 monographs as well as over 300 articles about jihad and Islamic terrorism. In addition to the above books, he is the author of Islam Unveiled, The Disturbing Questions About the World's Fastest Growing Faith. There's a number of books and a number of places where Robert has spoken and written, a number of television programs that he's been on as a guest. Certainly on this program here in our studios, he's been here many, many times. There's so many to go through. We won't go through all of them, but many of them are ones you may recognize, may be familiar with on a variety of major corporations, major stations like as MSNBC, CNBC, and Fox Network. So we won't get into all of those, but he's certainly a very prominent person in the community as he represents books about what's going on with Islam and how it's affecting our world. And we do welcome both these gentlemen here tonight. And again, the topic is, did Muhammad exist? For those of you who are watching, we are thanking you for your participation on this Friday night here. For the next 90 minutes, we'll be listening to this gentleman speak, but eventually we'll be taking your calls. We're going to want to take this number down at 248-416-1300. We're going to want to have you call and get your questions ready, because toward the last half hour or so of the program, we're going to open up the lines itself and give you a chance to ask some questions. But before we get into that, we're going to give each of these gentlemen a chance to make their claim about the topic again, which is, did Muhammad exist? And at this point right now, we're going to turn over to Imam, and you have 7 minutes as an opening statement, and then that will be followed by Robert's 7 minutes, and then we'll take the program from here. So Imam, 7 minutes, and you can start right now.
Yes, thank you. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship except Allah. He is alone and has no partner. And I bear witness that Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his servant and messenger. I seek refuge with Allah from the accursed Satan in the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. Tonight's topic is, did Muhammad exist? Obviously, I will be arguing the affirmative. And in order to understand this historic information that we're going to be given today, we have to give some background information. I will obviously be bringing information from scholars such as Robert Howland, as well as Patricia Cook and Michael Cook, et cetera, et cetera. So what I want people to understand is in this 7th century, what we're talking about, the element at that time was the Byzantine Empire was very powerful. And at this time, you had monophysite and diophysite Christians, and they held many innumerable councils that argued over the divinity of Christ. Did he have one nature? Did he have two natures? Et cetera, et cetera. Now, when we understand their ideology, we know that from historical data, these people in the Byzantine Empire, which was essentially the Roman Empire, they essentially did not like those that were outside of their ideological beliefs. So once we look at some of the references from people like Anastasius and Sophronius, we can see that their information actually proves that Muhammad did exist, but there is bigotry that is seen inside some of their statements. I'll give you some references from Robert Howland's book, Seeing Islam as Others Have Seen It. On page 100 and 101, he states that Anastasius, he puts out a message that, and this is a quote, he puts out the message that the Saracens are in the league with demons. Not well that the demons named the Saracens as their companions, as it was with reason. The latter are perhaps even worse than demons. Indeed, the demons are frequently much afraid of the mysteries of Christ. I mean his holy body, the cross, the saints, the relics, the holy oils, and many other things. But these demons of the flesh trampled all that is under their feet. Mock it, set it on fire, destroy it. Now, before I explain what that means exactly, Robert tells the people that Saracens is not referring to those Arabs that claim Islam. But if you open your dictionary and you look at the word Saracens, which I'm going to define right now, it says that it's a member of the pre-Islamic nomadic people of the Syrian Arabian deserts. Number 2, an Arab. Number 3, a Muslim, especially at the time of the Crusades. Middle English from the Old English. So Brother Robert uses semantics to prove his point that Muhammad, in fact, did not exist. But if we really analyze the culture that was established by the Byzantine Empire, these Romans, we can see that there was a hatred for these Arab people, and there was a hatred for those who were going against Christianity. If we look at Mr. Spencer's work and on page 120, and his and Robert Howland's work on page 120, it says this: the last folio of the manuscripts, this talking about manuscripts that's speaking about the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. He says it contains a list of caliphs down to Yazid ibn Abd al-Malik in 724. And going on through that page, the next paragraph, he says, in the year 945, in addition 7, on Friday the 4th, February 634 AD, at the 9th hour, there was a battle between the Romans and the Arabs of Muhammad. Now, I'm going to stop there just for a moment. Now, Mr. Spencer would say that, well, the word is actually Tayyi, and it has nothing to do with Muhammad ibn Abdullah, when certainly it does, and Mr. Horling explains this. Also, the letters MHMT that represent Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam were in the manuscript as well. So he says in Palestine, 12 miles east of Gaza, the Romans fled, leaving behind the Praetorian Burden, 12, who killed the Arabs. Some 4,000 poor villagers of Palestine were killed. They're Christians, Jews, and Samaritans. The Arabs ravaged the whole region. And he says this is the first explicit reference to Muhammad in a non-Muslim source. And it is very precise, dating inspires confidence that it ultimately derives from the first-hand knowledge. So here we are, Robert Spencer will try to manipulate this in front of the people, but it's absolutely clear. And it does essentially relate to accounts of that you can find in the Ahadith. Now, if you look at Sironius, here's Sironius that we're trying to say that, his words are valid. But the validation here, we have to look past the bigotry here, because they are calling these people demons. They are calling these people barbarians. So they are not calling these people by their rightful names. And if we understand, historically speaking, European nations...
Imam, you have 30 seconds.
European nations have always expressed a hatred for people that was outside of their midst. So when we get back into this information, talking about the Hagarenes, talking about the Saracens, it's clear that they are making mockery of these people. And they say that these people have, in fact, came with their own religion, their own books, their own ideology. And there was a conflict between ideological beliefs.
Okay, so, you know what, Imam, we're going to have to cut. Thank you so much for your opening statements at 7 minutes for you. And I will just also mention what I will do is give a little bit of warning, about 30 seconds or so before each of your segments is up, so that you have some warning. I apologize for not mentioning that sooner. Robert, we started the clock again. You have 7 minutes. You can go right ahead, sir.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Imam Bashir. The little bit of background is necessary. In debating the question, did Muhammad exist? What I mean to say by that, and what I meant in my book, Did Muhammad Exist?, book of that title, was to say that the Prophet of Islam, as explained in the Hadith, as we see in the many, many thousands of stories that are contained in the Hadith about him, has no historical basis. There may have been someone named Muhammad who was involved with some of the things that were ascribed to the Prophet of Islam ultimately. But the first biography of Muhammad that we have was written by Ibn Ishaq. Every single other biography of Muhammad that's been written since then, including my own, is based on Ibn Ishaq largely, as well as on the Hadith primarily of Bukhari and Muslim. Now, Ibn Ishaq wrote in the 750s, fully 125 years or more after the supposed death of Muhammad. Bukhari and Muslim date from the 9th century, even longer from the time that Muhammad is supposed to have lived. Now, that doesn't in itself necessarily mean that Muhammad as the Prophet of Islam did not exist. But the striking thing that you have when you look at the earliest sources is that there isn't any mention of him at all. Imam Bashir focused on the one manuscript from 634 that mentions the Tayyeye de MHMT. Now, the thing is, this is a Syriac manuscript. Syriac distinguishes between the letter that corresponds to the Roman letter T and the letter that corresponds to the Roman letter D. And so in the first place, it's not at all certain, and this is one of the great flaws of Robert Hoyland's book, is that he constantly assumes that when people speak about the Tayyeye or the Saracens or so on, that they're speaking about the Muslims, and he translates it that way. Actually, there's no basis to assume that the reference is to Muhammad at all. And corroborating that is the fact that there is simply no other mention in any contemporary manuscript at any time for many, many decades thereafter that says anything about what this Muhammad was supposed to be or what he was like. This is the problem. Sophronius did write extensively about the Arab invasion of Jerusalem. One of the striking things about it, he did write, you could even argue, I will even grant Imam Bashir's point that he argues with bigotry and hatred toward the invaders. But the fact is that there's a striking thing about what he writes, and that is that he never mentions that the invaders came with a new prophet or a new holy book or a new religion. Never once. Neither does any one of the people who write about the Arab invasions between the 630s and the 690s. Only in the 690s do we start to hear in the Muslim literature about a separate prophet named Muhammad. Now, Muhammad is a gerundive participle. The word Muhammad is a gerundive participle that can be roughly translated as the one who is being praised or the praised one. And it seems likely, given the fact that there is so little about him in this early period, and that there are coins minted at this time by the Arab conquerors that say the word Muhammad, but then have a cross by it. Now, of course, we know that Orthodox Islam rejects the cross, says Jesus did not die on the cross, and says that Jesus will come back and break all the crosses. So it's extraordinary to think that if these were Muslims who knew those stories, that they would have put crosses next to the name Muhammad on their money. It seems likely that it was rather actually a title, the praised one, that was applied to Jesus and to other figures. And that later, when the Arabs had consolidated this large empire, they looked around and they saw that the other great world powers of the day, the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire, both had unifying religions, common religions that that were the glue that held their empires together. That they were empires of various nationalities, various classes, but when they enforced the single religion in the empire, that was its unifying principle. So the Arabs, in order to give their own new empire a unifying principle, took this various material, this usage of the word Muhammad, this the various stories about warrior prophets and so on, that were very inchoate, very vague, sometimes directly contradicting what was later ascribed to the Prophet of Islam, taking various Jewish and Christian sources and cobbled together the religion of Islam and the figure of Muhammad. The chief support for this idea is this yawning absence, that even if the literature had not yet been consolidated, even if according to the standard Muslim story, the Quran was not collated and unified and sent to all the provinces until the 650s, the year 653, and the conquest of Jerusalem was before that in 638, even still, one would expect that the conquerors would have come and Sophronius would have talked to them and would have gotten some idea that they were coming because they had been commanded to fight, as Muhammad is, according to a hadith. He says, I have been commanded to fight against people until they confess that there is no God but Allah and I am his messenger. That being the case, somebody might have dropped a hint. But instead, there's this yawning silence, and there are these things that absolutely directly contradict later material about Muhammad and Islam, notably these crosses on the coins. And so it's a very strange thing. We have to either grant that Muslims existed, Islam existed, and Muhammad had existed, but the Muslims, even though they were conquering huge expanses of territory at the command of Muhammad, were absolutely silent about his own existence and their own inspiration from him and their own new holy book. And that they remained completely mum about this for 60 years plus. And that they hid these stories about Muhammad that later proliferated in the Hadith 150, 200 years later. They hid them, they never talked about them, they never gave any hint of their existence, and then suddenly they brought them out in the open much later. Or we can believe that it was all invented much later in order to give
Robert, you have 30 seconds.
Empire a coherence. And so that's a perfect place to stop. There are a few other things that are worth noting. One of the things is that the words used, Saracens, Hagarenes, Tayyeya, and so on, these are words that the conquered peoples used of the early Arab conquerors. Notably, they never used the word Muslims. They never spoke about Islam.
Very good. Thank you, Robert. So we got a couple seconds left on that one. That's very good. We have another 5-minute segment now for Imam. You have 5 minutes. You can go ahead and make your rebuttal right at this point right now.
Thank you, sir. When we look historically, and we're going to dissect what Robert just said. When you look historically, in particular, we can see in history during the African diaspora, when slaves was brought to the Americas, these people were, in fact, a great people. But their conquerors did not call them a great people. Their conquerors did not call them by the names that those people called themselves. So this is historically correct when it comes in particular to our European counterparts, and the Roman Empire has done the same thing. It's just a fact. this is what people do. But they called them demons. They called them barbarians. They was calling them out of their name. So when you have people that's calling you out of your name, it's only logical to understand that they are not giving those people the best representation like the people who's being conquered would do for themselves. Now let's just go to the coins for a moment that Robert was mentioning. What he's speaking about, and you can look at this at the British Museum. You can go right to their website and look at the early Islamic coins. Now, what he's talking about here is this is a Byzantine coin, and it has the crosses here, as you can obviously see, and crosses here. And this is Latin written around this coin. However, when we go to when the Muslims started minting the coin, you can clearly see here that the cross was removed. This top piece remained, but the cross part that was on the last coin was here. Also, on these crowns, the cross were removed as well, and you have Islamic inscriptions there. So he's omitting the evolution of the coins. When we go to another coin, here is a coin depicting Abdul Malik right here. And over here, you can see they kept the steps and they kept the pole, but they removed the cross. And also, you can see the Shahada and the Kalima right here around the coin with the name Mohamed, as well as pronouncing that Allah, which is right there. So the question is, and we look at these coins, now these coins went directly to Arabic writing. So you can see that there was an evolution in the coinage. So there's a lot of information being omitted with the coinage. So I just showed you, and you can go to the British Museum online, look at the evidence for yourself, and you can see that they removed the crosses from the coins. Now, if we go back into the Margarita, the papyrus in 642, you can see it's in Syriac and Maghrib. And it essentially, it uses the term muhajir or muhajirin, which is, we know, is an Islamic term. And Michael Cook and Patricia Cook, they established that this is in fact referring to those Muslims. And they say that there are two notions involved here. The first, rather lost in the Islamic tradition, is genealogical. The Maghreyi, as an early Syriac source, informs us are the descendants of Abraham by Hagar. This is what the Syriac papyrus is telling us. It's telling us that these Muslims, these Muhajirin, are the descendants from Hagar. Now, this is a non-Muslim source. So also, if we look at their book on page 3, Hagarism, the Making of the Islamic World, page 3, you can see that it says, a false prophet appeared among the Saracens. They say that the prophet has appeared coming with the Saracens and is proclaiming the event of the anointed one who is to come. Went off to Sycamina and referred the matter to an old man very well versed in the scripture. I asked him, what is your view, master and teacher, of the prophet who had appeared among the Saracens? Those Saracens, we have established already by dictionary definition that these were speaking about those Arab nomadic tribes. Now, he replied, groaning mightily, he is an impostor. Do the prophets come with a sword and chariot? Once again, all
Imam,
of the
your time is up. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're going to have to give time to Robert. We have 5 minutes for Robert, and then we're going to go to our first break. Robert, you go right ahead. Anytime, Robert.
Probably written by a Christian between the years 634 to 640. And so it's very early, and it does refer, as he was quoting, to an Arabian prophet, the prophet who has appeared among the Saracens. But it says that he was proclaiming the advent of the anointed one, the Christ who was to come. and also that he is alive and invading the Holy Land at the time of this writing. And so that those two things don't correspond to Muhammad, who's supposed to have died in 632, did not accompany the Muslim armies into Syria and Palestine in the 630s. After that, obviously, he was dead, and did not proclaim the advent of the Anointed One, the Christ who was to come. That was obviously a reference to the expected Jewish Messiah. And Christ is assumed as Al-Masih in the Quran. In Islam, this is not something that is a center of its preaching. So this just confirms what I was saying, that we don't see Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, here. Instead, we see somebody who has some resemblance to the prophet of Islam. We see a warrior prophet who is not named. We see somebody who is a prophet who is invading the areas of Syria and Palestine, and that is something that the Arabs certainly did, but after the time of Muhammad, whereas this prophet is doing it in this account, and so on. And so I think this is one of the things, one of the legends that was taken up to make the figure of Muhammad, but it certainly does not establish that Muhammad, as he is depicted in the Hadith and in the Sirah, as written in the 8th and 9th centuries, was going around in the 7th. There is absolutely no record of him. As far as the coins go, certainly, yes, there were coins at the time of Abdul Malik. Abdul Malik was caliph from 685 to 705. And yes, he did take the crosses off the coins. Now, I don't know how well this will show up, but I'll hold it up here. That's an earlier coin, and you can see that the cross is on the staff that the ruler is holding. And then underneath, you can see underneath the M on the obverse, it says Muhammad. And so that's Muhammad with the cross that I was talking about. Those coins date from before Abdul Malik. And the thing about it is that there was precisely an evolution in the coinage and in the understanding of what was going on at this time, precisely at the time of Abdul Malik. It's during the reign of Abdul Malik, we first start to hear about the Prophet of Islam as a specific individual, and start to hear about a holy book that is particular to the Muslims. Now, what's funny about this is that Abdul Malik was quoted as saying, I'm afraid that I'm going to die during Ramadan because I was born during Ramadan, I became caliph during Ramadan, and I collected the Quran together during Ramadan. Now, that's a very strange thing for him to say, because according to Islamic tradition, Uthman, his predecessor, collected the Quran together in the year 653, 40 years before Abdul Malik is talking. Now, if that were the case, then Abdul Malik would never have said that he collected the Quran together. But if it was Abdul Malik who was responsible, and there's a great deal more evidence for this, he's lieutenant and governor of Iraq, Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, people said, the first time we started reading the Quran in the mosques was at the time of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, and the Dome of the Rock inscription shows up with the reference to Muhammad as the Prophet of Allah in the 690s, same time as Abdul Malik. If Abdul Malik actually started the invention of Islam and the creation of Muhammad as a historical figure in order to buttress his empire, it would have been in his interests to invent the story of Uthman having collected the Quran together 40 years earlier, so as to give his own work the appearance of antiquity and authority. But if Uthman had collected the Quran together, then there's absolutely no reason for that tradition to have arisen that it was actually Abdul Malik who did it. And so this is just more evidence that the origins of the Quran, the canonical origins of Islam as explained in the earliest Islamic sources, just don't have any basis in historical reality. You would think that these Arabs, as they were conquering these huge expanses of territory, and when they made their coins and when they built public buildings, that the coins would have said, and the public buildings would have said, there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. They never say that.
Instead, Robert, you have about 20 seconds.
That are that are anathema to Islam, and so it's only because there was no Islam yet.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much. We've gotten through the first portion of our program tonight. We have roughly about an hour or so left, and we will go to a quick break. But I just wanted to let everyone know, our viewing audience out there, that for this next hour, we will not be on the digital satellite. We'll be exclusively on the internet, and you can go to the trinitychannel.com or abnsat.com to watch the rest of this program. We'll be taking a break, but also, just as I mentioned earlier, we'll be also taking your calls eventually at the number 248-416-1300. And again, the topic of this program is, did Muhammad exist? We'll have our two gentlemen continue with their debate program as we get into the next segment right after this break.
Would you like to watch our English webcast live on abnsat.com? You can now easily view our English webcast channel live on abnsat.com. Simply go to www.abnsat.com and choose the icon Television Channels from the homepage menu. Then click ABN English Channel, or you can go to www.trinitychannel.com. We're always finding ways to make it easier for you to watch us on the web. Go to trinitychannel.com for more information. Stay tuned to abnsat.com for all the latest ministry updates. As of January 14th, 2014, no more English shows will be broadcast on ABN Arabic channel. Now you can watch all of your favorite English live talk shows on trinitychannel.com. Visit www.trinitychannel.com for all the live shows and all the latest information on the English part of ABN ministry.
And welcome back. We are going to continue with our debate. At this point, we're going to just review a little bit. We're going to allow Imam to go ahead and have 5 minutes to talk, and then we'll have Robert follow up with another 5 minutes. Imam will have 3 minutes, and then Robert will have 3 minutes, and then we'll have each gentleman to do a summary, 6 minutes apiece. We'll go to a break, and then at that point, we'll be opening up the phone line. So again, get those questions ready and those observations as you recognize the number, which is 248-416-1300. And again, the rest of the program tonight will be on the internet exclusively. Imam, you have 5 minutes, and you can start right now.
Yes. The thing that we have to look at is the overall information. So, Mr. Robert, he says for himself that, this doesn't mean that Muhammad didn't exist and someone was there during the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just happened to be doing the same things that is attributed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is a lot of loopholes, and in order to clear those loopholes up, we're going to have to bring primary direct evidence. So if he's going to make a claim to say that there was someone there, but we can't say it's Muhammad due to lack of information, but he's not evaluating all the information. So which tells me that there's a biasness there already, and bigotry is going across the board, because these people obviously say that these Hagarenes, these Caesarians, they have a prophet, they have a teaching, they have their own spirituality. Now, when we go to the Gregory the Great, for instance, and if we look at Gregory the Great that reigned in 590 to 604, and then Constance II, who reigned from 641 to 668, during their literature, you can see that the Archdeacon Theodore, in the number 19, because there's different numbers there, and I'm hurrying fast so you can get the point, and you have to go get these books and study the information. But it says that the godless Saracens entered this holy city of Christ our Lord, Jerusalem, with the permission of God, and in punishment for our negligence, which is considerable, and immediately proceeded in haste to the place which is called the capital. They took with them men, some by force, others by their own will, in order to clean that place and to build that cursed thing intended for the prayers, and which they call a mosque. So, and that's on page 62 through 63. So when you analyzing this information, you can clearly see that there are places of worship during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, as well as after him, that is being developed. And if these places are being developed, if these people are seeing that these Arabs are coming with a new teaching, are coming with something that is contrary to their teaching, which is the divinity of Jesus Christ, then we must say that Muhammad, in fact, was the arbiter of that information. So as we look further into further information, we see them being called, matter of fact, let me read this on page 70 to 73. It says, the Byzantine armies arrayed against them, and in the fighting rise up the trophies and add the victory to victory. Moreover, they are rised up more and more against us and increase their blasphemy of Christ and the church, and uttered wicked blasphemies against God. These God fighters boast of prevailing over all, assiduously and unrestrainably limiting their leader, who is the devil, and who is the devil. So you see how they're speaking about this leader? Do you see how they're speaking about these people? This is bigotry in the information. So it's obvious that things are being omitted for the simple fact that they are conquerors and they are looking down upon these Arab people. This is absolutely clear. So he calls their leader a devil. He says that their leader is essentially off the right path. He's not a true prophet. He's not a true messenger. So this is information explaining to us that those Muslims, those Arabs, did in fact have a leader that was leading them and bringing new information. As far as the Holy Quran is concerned, you can see even today, historically
Imam, you have 30 seconds.
Historically speaking, that the Quran is memorized. There's Muslims today that will memorize the entire Quran. So they would tell you that, well, there's no Quran until the mid-8th century or the early 9th century, you know, but the thing is that the Quran was memorized, and that's proof today by Hafiz of the Quran. And so we have to use all of the historical information, put it together, and make sense of the information.
Okay, your time is up. Thank you very much. Robert, we've reset the clock, and it's you have 5 minutes. You can go ahead and start right now.
Thanks, Chris. There's actually a glaring omission here on the part of Imam Bashir. He has said several times in his last statement that the early records do say that the Hagarenes or the Saracens or the Tayyaye, whatever they're referred to as, actually did have a prophet. I would ask him to quote that. He never did manage to quote it. He quoted a good bit of information about how they laid waste and how they were blasphemous and how they prayed, and nobody has denied that they prayed. They were actually pre-Islamic monotheists that had some elements of Judaism and Christianity in their religion, but it was not a religion that had a specific creed or a very organized character, and it was elaborated into Islam. But he actually says that I was saying that there was somebody around who did all the things that Muhammad did. I didn't say anything remotely like that. There are some people around who did some small number of the things that were later taken and ascribed to Muhammad. But the vast majority of the material about Muhammad was invented in the 8th and 9th centuries, as even the Muslim scholars themselves acknowledged. The Imam Bukhari, for example, collected 300,000 stories about Muhammad, hadiths about Muhammad, of which he determined through various means that only 3,000 were authentic. So he himself was acknowledging, in other words, that 297,000 stories about Muhammad had been faked. And I'm saying that he was essentially right, only he was about 3,000 off. The whole thing was faked. And the primary evidence for that is that there is just no mention of any of it before this. It wasn't just that the Quran was memorized, instead it was never quoted. Hafiz today, people who have the Quran memorized, they always go around quoting it and applying it to opposite situations in their day-to-day experience. The Muslims are never recorded as having done that. And see, the fact that the literature against them is hostile, or as Imam Bashir says, full of bigotry, would not mean that they would never make any mention of Muhammad or the Prophet or Muhammad or Islam or the Quran had they existed, because they would have done their best to tear them down. After all, John of Damascus, writing a bit later, does indeed attack many Islamic doctrines head on and many elements of the Quran head on, although it's noteworthy that even the way he describes the Quran in the mid-8th century does not correspond to the Quran as we have it today. Maybe he got it all wrong, or maybe there was not the Quran as we have it today as of that time. In any case, The fact is that this was a very polemical age and a highly charged environment in which there was a great deal of intellectual give and take. And so it's inconceivable that had these invaders come with a new prophet, a new religion, and a new holy book, that the people whose lands they had invaded and who they had conquered and subjugated under their rule and destroyed their houses of worship and so on, that they never would have engaged in polemical debates, polemical discussions, and even outright bigoted attacks on their new prophet and new religion. They don't, because there was no mention thereof. It simply was not something that existed at that time. As far as quoting that they were saying their leader was a devil, well, sure, the invaders had leaders, of course. They had various generals, various leaders of armies, various heads of state, even the caliphs, as Cronin Cook, to whom Imam Bashir has referred several times, have shown in their book on the caliphate. The early caliphs never regarded themselves as the successors of Muhammad. They had regarded themselves as the successors, the caliphs of Allah, of God, in the early period. And they only referred to themselves in that way. It's only after Abdul Malik, and around that time, as I have said, that we start hearing that the caliphs are the successors of Muhammad. And so, of course, they had leaders. And of course, the people who they conquered and mistreated called their leaders devils. But they never called them prophets, even false prophets. They would have, if they could have, because it would have been yet another weapon in their arsenal. They make no mention of it at all, which indicates that there simply wasn't anything there for them to mention. The literature is very great. I have to emphasize that. And extensive, I mean. There's a great deal of writing by the conquered, particularly the Christians of Syria and Egypt and North Africa. They wrote a great deal about the
Robert, you have 30 seconds.
And so the fact that they never mention Muhammad, the Quran, or Islam in all this wealth of material precisely about the conquests and the conquerors is more than striking. It's decisive. Muhammad, as the prophet of Islam, did not exist at that point.
Great. Okay, so now we've reset the clock. We're going to give Imam 3 minutes to give his next series of statements, and then we'll follow up with Robert. So, Imam, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, Robert said a lot, but when you look at the Doctrina Jacobi, for instance, this was actually written prior to the death of the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. So it's a few years before 634 AD. So when this mention of the false prophet that has appeared among the Saracens, this in fact is key proof and evidence during the time that the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, lived. So, and they say that the prophet has appeared coming with the Saracens and is proclaiming the event of the appointed one who is to come. And if you go into Islamic ideology, you will see the connection with that, but we're staying on the historical information. So once he applied, well, who is this guy? Well, who is he really? Well, he's an imposter. He's a prophet with a sword and a chariot. And what is really strange is that the Christians of today will make these very same claims today in 2014 that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came with a sword. He came conquering. He came with brute force. So this corresponds all the way historically from the early 7th century till today. Now, when we understand that there were mosques being established, we know for a fact, this is not speculation, but it's a fact that these prayer buildings that is called masjids belong to those who proclaimed that they were Muslims. Now, these terms, Muslims, according to various historians, came much later, but nonetheless, the religious practices certainly were being observed. And if we look at, Robert Holland's, the people need to go get Robert Holland's book, and Patricia Cook as well, and Michael Cook, because when you read these this information, you will be able to clearly see that one, there's bigotry used, which means that there's a bias.
30 seconds, Imam.
That means that there's a bias. And if there is a bias, and if there is a hatred of the people, you're going to have to read through that. But we have clearly came and shown historical documentation that is referring to these Hagarenes, that is referring to these Saracens, and that the scholars have admitted that they are, in fact, speaking about those Arabs at that time and day.
Robert, I'm sorry, Imam, your time is up. Robert, we're going to give you 3 minutes. You can start right now.
Thank you, Chris. Imam Bashir should actually go back and double check his copy of Robert Hoyland's book, because he will find that the Doctrina Jacobi was not written during the time of Muhammad. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad died in 632. According to Hoyland, the Doctrina Jacobi was written between 634 and 640. That's after Muhammad died. The Doctrina Jacobi also says that this prophet, this unnamed warrior prophet of the Saracens, has the keys of paradise, which is incredible. Now, that is something that does not correspond to any Islamic doctrine at all. And so even if one granted that Muhammad went around preaching about the coming of Christ, which is something that is indeed in Islamic eschatology, but is by no means a feature, it's not mentioned in the Quran at all. And so it is by no means central to Islam. Even if we grant that, which is far-fetched to start with, it's clear that this figure is doing other things that Muhammad does not do. And so either it's getting it all wrong about Muhammad, just like every other record that is supposed to be about Muhammad in this time, none of which name him, or there was no Muhammad and the whole thing was put together later, perhaps with some parts of this and some parts of other material. As far as, I also have to unfortunately correct, with respect, Imam Bashir, the scholar that he is quoting or referring to repeatedly is Patricia Crone, not Patricia Cook. The confusion comes from her having co-written the book Hagarism with Michael Cook. It's Patricia Crone and Michael Cook. Now, as far as Crone and Cook's book goes, I would also invite him to go back and read that entire book, because Crone and Cook postulate, on the basis of some of the information that I have given tonight, and on a great deal of other information, for example, that Mecca was never the center of a trade that it is purported to be in the Hadiths and in the Sirah, that the canonical story of early Islam has no historical basis. Now, certainly, Patricia Crone has retreated from this stance in later books, but since the Imam Bashir is referring to Hagarism, I think that it is noteworthy that Hagarism actually supports the idea that Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, as depicted in the Hadith, did not exist. As far as Crone's later stance, she has never gone back and explained why her earlier conclusions were false.
30 seconds, Robert.
Treated from them under unexplained circumstances. And so trying to come to the material objectively, you cannot come to the conclusion that her later stance is based on a reconsideration of the evidence at hand, or at least one, she hasn't shared that reconsideration with us.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, gentlemen, we now are at the last portion of our program before we go to our last break. Each of you will have 6 minutes apiece to go ahead and make your closing statements. Imam, we've reset the clock at 6 minutes. You can start right now with your closing statement.
Yeah, thank you, Robert, for that correction on Patricia Crone. Michael Cook, they co-authored it, and I mixed that up. Thank you for that. Nonetheless, if we, in Hagarism, the making of the Islamic world, it's very interesting because the point is being made that perhaps the hadith are, not as accurate as one may think. And this is not something that is strange to me, because I understand the system of validating what hadiths are sahih, or what which is authentic, which ones are weak, so on and so forth. But if we look at their sources and understand what they are saying, and I'm going to quote one more time on page 8 and 9 of Hagarism, she says, our sources, however, reveal an earlier designation of the community, speaking of the Muslim community, and one which fits well with the context of ideas presented by Sabius. This designation appears in Greek as Margaritia, in a papyrus of 642, and in Syriac as Margaret or Margareyi from as early as 642. The corresponding Arabic term is Muhajirin. These are two notations involved here. The first, rather lost in the Islamic tradition, is genealogical. The Mahgreli, as an early Syriac source, informs us are descendants of Abraham by Hagar. But alongside this ascribed status, there is also an atoned dome, which is fully preserved in the Islamic tradition, the Muhajir. So the Muhajir are those who take part in a hijrah or an exodus. So when you look at that information, you have to say to yourself, well, here is historical data that's saying that these people in Syriac, these are Syriac people telling them that, listen, Muhammad people, in fact, did exist, and they were of Ishmael. They were the people of Ishmael. And of course, the Christians of that day claimed to be a part of that lineage of the Bani Israel, or the children of Israel. So upon looking at all of the information once again, we'll be able to clearly see that, and I'm going to emphasize this again, and I'm going to emphasize it over so we can understand the bigotry that was held inside these scholars, or these people that they are taking from. Anastasius, Sironius, and many more. They always attack these people for some reason. And when you see the attack, you also see the counter, that they are placing their religion in the forefront. They are saying, no, our Christ is right. Our Lord is divine, not their Lord, and they are only barbarians. So it shows that they did not take a historian's process of analyzing information and just giving people the proper data. So if they're not just giving people unbiased data, then how can we say that the evidence should be authenticated for Muhammad not existing? It just doesn't make sense. It's just not logic. So if you look at, I'm going to pull up Sophronius' display of hatred once again, and what he says. He says, but the present circumstances are forcing me to think differently about our way of life. For why are so many wars being fought among us? Why do barbarians raid abound? Why are the troops of the Saracens attacking us? Why has there been so much destruction and plunder? Why is there incessant outpouring of human blood? Why are the birds of the sky devouring human bodies? Why are churches being pulled down? Why is the cross being mocked? Why is Christ, who is the dispenser of all good things and the provider of this joyousness of ours, blasphemed by pagan mouths, so that he justly cried out to us, because of you, my name is blasphemed among pagans. And this is the worst of all the terrible things that are happening to us. That is why the vengeful and God-hating Saracens, the abomination of desolation clearly foretold to us by the prophets, overrun the places which are not allowed to them, plunder cities, devastate fields, burn down villages, set on fire the holy churches, overturn the sacred monastery. So all of these accounts and all of these people that are being used to prove that Muhammad didn't exist, actually, we cannot really depend on that information, because they have an agenda. And the agenda,
30 seconds, Imam.
And that agenda was to suppress the very thing to come in that was actually going to replace Christianity. So they did not want their religion being replaced. They wanted their religion to remain strong. So if Muhammad, may peace be upon him, have is historically correct in his life, then that means Christianity is threatened. And that threat is what these people wanted to deviate the world from, and especially in their society.
Right. Thank you. We're going to cut it there. We have 6 minutes left. Robert, you have 6 minutes to make your closing statement.
Yeah, of course Sophronius didn't like the invaders. Absolutely. And of course he is a highly biased source. The question is not that you have to have an unbiased observer in order to be able to trust him. It depends on what kind of information you are trying to get from the source. Now, clearly, Sophronius dislikes the invaders. And clearly, he speaks. I have this passage that Imam Bashir was just reading from, quoted at length in my own book, Did Muhammad Exist? And he's very upset with the invaders, with their opposition to the Byzantine armies, with their opposition to the church, and so on. But never in his long screed against them does he say, and they have this person who they claim is a prophet, who is a false prophet, and they have this holy book that they say is a holy book, which is actually a book full of lies and blasphemies, and so on. The kinds of things you would expect him to say if he had actually been confronted with material like that. Precisely an unbiased source, precisely an angry source trying to defend Christianity in the Byzantine Empire would have attacked those things head on, and would not have just let it pass over in silence that the invaders were coming with an entirely new religion and with a new prophet and a holy book. The idea of that strains credulity beyond belief. As I said before, it was a polemical age and a polemical time. And it is precisely because Christianity would ultimately be challenged by Islam that somebody like Sophronius, who is the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the leading bishop in that area, the leading Christian leader in that area, would have been anxious to defend Christian doctrines against their attacks in Islamic doctrine, in the Quran, in the statements of Muhammad. He never did so because they hadn't been invented yet. Those things didn't exist yet, and he shows no awareness that they existed. Neither does anyone else at the time of these conquests. Here also is an example of what happens in the Islamic literature. Ibn Ishaq, in the 8th century, the first biographer of Muhammad, he writes this. This is just one little story about one little thing that happened in Ibn Ishaq's very large book. Meanwhile, the messenger of God, that's Muhammad, had sent Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas on campaign with 8 men from among the Muhajirun. He went as far as Qarar in the Hijaz. Then he returned without having had a clash with the enemy. End of story. Now, very brief account of a battle that didn't happen, essentially. We'll take the same account of the same battle in Al-Waqidi, who wrote in the 9th century and depended upon Ibn Ishaq as his source. Then the messenger of God appointed Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas to the command against Qarar, Qarar being part of Jufa near Qum in Dhul Qada, 18 months after the hijrah of the messenger. Abu Bakr ibn Ismail ibn Muhammad said on the authority of his father, on the authority of Amir ibn Sa'd, on the authority of his father, the messenger of God said, O Sa'd, go to Qarar, for the caravan belonging to Quraysh will pass through it. So I went out with 20 or 21 men on foot. We would hide during the day and travel at night until we arrived there on the morning of the 5th day. We found that the caravan had passed through the day before. The messenger had enjoined upon us not to go beyond Qarar. Had we not done so, I would have tried to catch up with it. Notice how Al-Waqidi knows so much more about this expedition 50 to 75 years later than Ibn Ishaq did. And as Patricia Crone, the historian, notes, he knows all this on the impeccable authority of the leader of the expedition himself. But how is it that those details eluded Ibn Ishaq, who wrote a very extensive book about all of Muhammad's activities, and yet made their way into Al-Waqidi some 50 years later? We can remotely grant, okay, Al-Waqidi had access to oral traditions that had been passed on from people close to Muhammad, but it escaped Ibn Ishaq's notice. But this strains credulity yet again, because Ibn Ishaq made it his business, his life's work, to collect the traditions about Muhammad that were considered reliable and to pass them on. What's obviously going on here is legendary elaboration and legendary embroidery. And the reason why those 297,000 hadiths that Bukhari found that were forged, had been forged, was because once the figure of Muhammad was invented, then people began to invent stories about him to support their own positions, and warring factions within the Muslim community would invent wholly contradictory stories in which Muhammad says one thing, and then you find another hadith in which he says exactly the opposite. And this is because this is a clear indication that either the man never made up his mind, or he was a legendary figure being manipulated for contemporary political purposes. For example, he says, let me see if I know I had this bookmarked and time is running out. He says that there are hadiths in Bukhari that say that the Prophet performed ablution by washing the body part only once. Then there are others that say the Prophet performed ablution by washing the body parts twice. There is one that says Muhammad disapproved the drinking of water while standing. And yet another that says Muhammad drank water while standing. It says in one place that Muhammad forbade the killing of women and children in warfare. We hear a lot about that one. But in another, he says, when asked about the women and children who were among pagans who were being attacked, he says, they are of them. In other words, they're all polytheists, they're all pagans, you can kill
30
them.
seconds. 30 seconds.
Flat contradictions indicate that this was a figure who was the creation of various committees, and that the various committees disagreed with each other, so they made him say things that contradicted each other. And then Islamic jurists go into all this massive material and pick out ones that they think are authentic based on a chain of transmitters. Chains of transmissions can be invented just as easily as the stories could.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Imam, and thank you for participating in this debate. We will go to a quick break, but soon after that, we'll be taking your calls again, 248-416-1300. We welcome you to start calling right now and get your calls in for the Imam or for Robert, as we'll be continuing our discussion tonight. Did Muhammad exist? We welcome your questions, and we appreciate your viewing. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this brief break.
من جديد برامجنا المباشرة لعام 2014 برنامج ترنيمتك.
Stay tuned to abnsat.com for all the latest ministry updates. As of January 14th, 2014, no more English shows will be broadcast on ABN Arabic channel. Now you can watch all of your favorite English live talk shows on trinitychannel.com. Visit www.trinitychannel.com for all the live shows and all the latest information on the English part of ABN ministry. Would you like to watch our English webcast live on abnsat.com? You can now easily view our English webcast channel live on abnsat.com. Simply go to www.abnsat.com and choose the icon Television Channels from the homepage menu. Then click ABN English Channel, or you can go to www.trinitychannel.com. We're always finding ways to make it easier for you to watch us on the web. Go to trinitychannel.com for more information.
And that's right. We are on the Trinity Channel right now, and you're watching us on the internet, or actually you could also watching us on a free download, ABN Sat, on your phone and on your smartphone. And we do appreciate all the people out there that are watching tonight. We do have a few callers waiting. We will be taking those very soon here. But again, we welcome anyone else that is out there. Again, the number 248-416-1300. We appreciate your participation in this program as we have these two gentlemen here debating, did Muhammad exist? We have got our first caller. Barry, talk to us. Who do you like to speak with? What's your question?
Gentlemen, thank you so much. I am supremely honored to be able to listen to both Mohamed and Robert speak. Thank you very much for being able to present programs like this. I just have one simple question for both Mohamed and Robert. I think one point, as far as when you're talking about warfare in the Quran, that has not been addressed at this point, and Mohamed, I'm kind of disappointed that you didn't bring it up first, and that is the two abrogation verses that are in the Quran and how those abrogation verses apply to, Mohamed, what you were saying on how to justify there is no violence, and I think I know how Robert's going to address this. But I really think the abrogation verses are supremely important when we're talking about whether or not warfare is called for in the Quran. So I'd kind of like Mohamed to respond first, and then Robert to respond afterwards, if you would. And thanks again, guys, for putting on this program. I love you both, and God bless you.
God bless you, too. And Imam, I'm going to give you a chance to speak. We're going to try to manage our time well here. Go ahead and start, if you would mind.
Okay, he was a little, on my end, I couldn't understand him all the way. Is he asking about the abrogation of verses in the Quran?
Yes.
Well, essentially, our teacher teach us is that that verse was speaking about prior scriptures before the event of the Quran. Because the Quran clearly said, "Dalika al-kitabu la rayba fi hudal lil muttaqin," that this book is a guidance for the righteous. It's a perfect book. It's a guidance for the righteous. So, the abrogation verse was not talking about the verses of the Holy Quran, but rather it was talking about things previous to the Holy Quran that were abrogated.
Okay. All right, Robert.
Barry, I'm sorry to say, but I think you're not watching the live debate. I think you're watching a video of an older debate that I did about does the Quran teach warfare with Mubin Sheikh. Mubin is not here with us tonight. I am debating tonight with the Imam Bashir Abdul Haqq about the question, did Muhammad exist? We haven't discussed warfare or abrogation because that's not really the topic tonight. But since you asked the question, abrogation does actually have to do with the doctrine of warfare, in that most of the mainstream Islamic scholars teach that the Quran's verses of warfare take precedence over the Quran's verses of peace. But as I say, that's not on topic tonight. So I just want to say abrogation is on topic, because the idea that verses of the Holy Book can be overridden by other ones, or that even various teachings or hadiths can be canceled by other ones, is made necessary by the fact that you have this whole theology that's being invented, this religion that's being invented. And so, contradictions were going to appear, and they did appear, and they're explained away by this idea of abrogation. But in any case, once again, we are live tonight. Maybe you're watching the video of me with debating Mubin Sheikh, and I appreciate that, but we are live tonight with the Imam Bashir Abdul Haqq, and the topic is, did Muhammad exist?
Very good, Robert. I appreciate you making that point, and I apologize for not catching that as clearly as you did, but we do welcome the callers, and we would like to encourage everyone, like Robert indicated, to stay on topic. And again, the topic of tonight's program was, did Muhammad exist? It is a live program here on the TrinityChannel.com. We have another caller, Kareem. What is your question, sir, and who's it directed to?
First of all, I say assalamu alaikum to Imam Bashir. You're doing a wonderful job. You're exposing this guy. But once again, my question would be to Robert. We have millions of hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Millions of hadiths of him. But the life of Jesus, we only have the first 30 years of his life. We don't have any stories of him. So are you saying that we should just throw away all these hadiths? Thank you.
Well, remember, it wasn't me who wants to throw away hadiths. It was Bukhari who threw away 297,000 hadiths, according to Islamic tradition, because they weren't authentic. He deemed 3,000 to be authentic and put them in his collection of hadiths, which is considered most reliable among the hadith collections by Muslims. The problem of the hadith is that the Imam Bukhari lived in the 9th century, 200 years after Muhammad. And so he did not have the opportunity to speak to anybody who knew Muhammad. He didn't have the opportunity, obviously, to meet Muhammad himself. He only had the chance to collect these stories. Now, the question is, where were these stories before that? Why is it that there's no mention of these stories, of any of them? Muhammad is never quoted as doing anything. Muhammad is never quoted as saying anything. In the first 60 years after he died, after he's supposed to have died, when the Arab armies were conquering these huge expanses of territory, allegedly at his command and according to the command of the Quran. Why is it that all this material suddenly appears in the 9th century, but never is even referred to existing in the 7th century and 8th century? There is an Islamic scholar, Nabia Abbott, who postulates that the reason for this is because the Caliph Umar, in the middle of the 7th century, ordered hadiths to be destroyed because he thought that they would result in idolatry of the figure of Muhammad. That's a nice theory, but the problem with it is that if Umar destroyed hadiths, then where were they so that Bukhari could find them 150 years later? It doesn't make any sense. And so, I guess I'm exposed, but the problem is that Muhammad is even further exposed as essentially a legendary figure.
Well, if I just could, respond just quickly. Well, a couple of things is not being understood, and one thing that's not being understood is oral tradition. Oral tradition is something that is a reality. So there are things that are passed on from generation to generation. This is a fact that people that would only be ignorant if we say, well, it's an oral tradition and now it developed and someone wrote it down that is unauthenticated, which can't be further from the truth. But there's still this insinuation that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not exist in your very comment. But when you look at the people saying that, the God fighters were boasting that they was going to prevail over all. When you look at that, they're imitating their leader. The information is there to show and prove that, in fact, Muhammad existed. And if that leader who they were imitating was not Muhammad, then the burden of proof would be on a person like Robert to show us, well, who was that person that was that they were trying to imitate. And it just goes back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in fact, had to existed due to the occurrences and the evolution of the Islamic system of theology and ideology.
Gentlemen, currently we don't have any other callers at this point, so we do encourage anyone who is watching. The number again, 248-416-1300. The lines are open. We still have roughly 15 minutes or so before our program is over for this evening.
Again, Chris, since there was yes. Can you hear me? Since there was somebody who, since the gentleman responded, can I respond to the further points?
Absolutely. Go right ahead, Robert. Yes.
I appreciate that. The oral tradition is a very important point. And certainly there is oral tradition, and nobody's denying that it exists. The problem is that there's no record of it here being done. It's not just that there are no written records. I mean, obviously written records are all that are going to survive, but there's no written record of anybody saying anything about Muhammad. And it strains credulity here again, that all these invaders, supposedly energized by the Quran's commands of conquests, by Muhammad's commands of conquest, that they went into these lands and conquered, but they never said anything to the people that they were conquering about why they were doing it or who had inspired them. And this leader that is spoken of that they imitate, well, obviously, those were the leaders of the armies and the governors of the areas and the various caliphs. There is no indication in any of the references to those leaders that the leader styled himself a prophet. And that's the big hole in all this. And if these oral traditions existed at the time, and that didn't just start to be invented in the 8th and 9th centuries, then it's exceedingly curious that nobody on either side, neither the Arabs nor their conquered people, made any reference to their existing, made any reference to the idea that they had a new prophet or a new religion at all.
Thank you, Robert. Would you like, Imam? We do have a caller. We will go ahead and take this next call. I'm not sure who is calling in. What's your name and what's your question?
Yes, hello. It's me. Yes, hello?
Hello.
Yeah, hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. What's your question, Kareem?
Yes, this is me, Kareem. Yeah, back again to Robert. So you're saying because of the fact of whoever it was that threw hundreds of hadiths, that this would disprove the life of the existence of Prophet Muhammad. But what about in the Council of Nicaea, where people had debates of different Bibles, and many Bibles were burnt? So should we say because of that Jesus didn't exist? Thank you.
That's fictional. That didn't happen. The Council of Nicaea didn't deal with the Bible. That comes from Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code, but there's no historical basis for it. You can find the proceedings of the Council of Nicaea. They're public. They've been in print since the year 325 AD, 1700 years ago, and they have not been tampered with. There are plenty of manuscripts, plenty of references to them by all parties concerned, unlike Muhammad and Islam. And so you can find what the Council of Nicaea did, and it didn't do that. But in any case, we're not arguing about the existence of Jesus. If you want to have a debate with me about whether or not Jesus existed, that would be fine. But that's a separate question. And we would approach it in exactly the same way. We would look at the historical records and evaluate their various weight and come to a conclusion. That's what I'm doing here. And the fact is that the stories about Muhammad don't even begin to be mentioned until the middle part of the 8th century, 125 years after he died. We get a tremendous proliferation of them about 200 years after he died. The question is, where were all these stories before that? And why does nobody ever mention any of them or the fact that they existed? That's the big hole in the canonical story, Islam's canonical story of its own early origins, that blows the whole thing apart.
Imam, would you like to respond at all to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that's being omitted. And the thing that we have to understand when we're evaluating these sources, and it's amazing that Robert is using the very same sources that I'm using, and we having a conflict. But if we really truly understand the nature of these sources, he says, well, there's a mention of Muhammad, which I mentioned, in the year 634 at the 9th hour, there was a battle between the Romans and the Arabs of Muhammad. So what does Robert do? He takes out, and says, well, that's not what it means, and then he just runs with it. Then you have other references that's talking about this leader of the Muslims who they are trying to imitate. They're not saying various generals. They're talking about a specific individual who these people are following, who they are trying to be like. This is imitation or following a sunnah. So upon evaluating all of the information, it is clear that it's more plausible and is consistent with the existence of the Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings of Allah be upon him. And then when you say, well, why didn't they just boast it, and why didn't they just write it all over the place? Well, it's not the standard practice of every culture. When you understand the culture of those Arabs at that time, these was more so of nomadic people. So the people around them were leading the fight. The Romans were leading the fight at the time. It was the Byzantine Empire. The Persians had power. So those in that major Asia Minor area, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, so on and so forth, their power came in later. So we have to understand how things naturally progress and how they evolve. Robert showed us a coin where it says that Muhammad was there. It had Muhammad there, and it certainly did. I read it. However, he has to go and explain to us, well, did the Arab have a minting press? I mean, how exactly were the coins minted? And he's trying to essentially say that because it's saying Muhammad on that coin, that it refers to Isa or Jesus, may peace be upon him, when that cannot be the case, because we see over that from the time of the beginning of the 7th century all the way to the end of the 7th century, you can see an evolution in the mint and the coinage of the so-called Muslims of that time. So there's plenty mention of these people and what they believe, but he wants to hear it in the way that he wants to hear it in. And this is not nothing different than what our European counterparts has been doing for the last 2,000 years. And I want to go back to this because I want to make it plain and simple for the people. When we look at the African diaspora, when these slaves was brought here to the Americas and the Caribbean, you might say, well, what does it have to do with this? This is about the psychology.
You're going to give 20 seconds to finish up here.
Yes, I'm going to finish. When they strip information from people and disregard the people and name the people what their original names are not, of course, that's bigotry. So we cannot allow this bigots to be the example for our primary evidence. We just can't do it. It doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It's not rational.
Robert, we're going to give you a chance to respond to that. We're looking toward the end of our program here. We are getting close to our end time here. Robert, why don't you go ahead, and if you would, you have a couple minutes, you can go ahead and make your final comments here tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. The Imam Bashir just then referred to the Muslims. He said that the people said that the Muslims had this leader. Actually, they never say that. That's one of the funny things about this, is that they never call them Muslims. Now, what I'm referring to that is that the conquered people never called them Muslims in the 60 years that the conquests were going on. The initial phase of what is now considered to be the first part of Islam, they're never referred to as Muslims, and the word Islam is never mentioned. Now, the Imam Bashir makes the connection between that and the treatment of the slaves in North America. Now, this is rather fantastic because the slaves were oppressed and were indeed stripped of their identities. Yes. But the Muslims were the conquerors. They were not oppressed. They were the conquering people. The oppressed people were the ones who were writing these records. And see, the thing is that as soon as we do start hearing about Muhammad in the 8th century, and we start hearing about the Quran in the 8th century, then the Christian polemicists go at it, and they start to argue about Islamic doctrine, and they start to denigrate the figure of Muhammad and say he's not a prophet, and so on. And so the Imam Bashir would have us believe that Christian polemicists of 50, 75, 100 years earlier, even though they were faced with the same people, talking about the same Islam and the same prophet and so on, they never bothered to refute anything that these people were apparently saying, although there's no record of them saying it. They never bothered to say anything about Islam or Muhammad or the Quran. It was only later that they started fighting it. And yet these people were, as the Imam Bashir has pointed out several times, very hostile to the invaders. Now, if the Christian polemicists of the later ages were eager to engage and refute Islam and eager to engage and refute the idea of Muhammad as a prophet, why would the Christian polemicists of the earlier era just pass it all by unsaid? And the obvious answer, the easiest possible answer, is that it's simply because the figure of Muhammad as a prophet had not yet been invented, had not been elaborated. Even if you grant that the mention in 634 of the Tayyaye, not the Arabs, the Tayyaye of Muhammad, the Tayyaye that is of MHMT, refers to Muhammad and not to someone else or to someone who's being referred to as the praised one. Even if you grant that, there is absolute notice at the straws that the Imam Bashir is grasping at, that he has to hold on to this one mention of this one name and say that it's Muhammad, because all the coins that say Muhammad have crosses on them. So it's unlikely they're talking about Muhammad the prophet. And so you have this one mention. Think about all the voluminous material, the hundreds and thousands of pages of hadith that you have later. He's got none of that in the 7th century. None of it, no reference at all. Just one mention of a name that he insists refers to the Prophet of Islam. Fine, it does. But then how come everybody is so absolutely mum about everything else about this man? How is it that only 200 years later do we start to hear about what he was like and what he taught and what he said that his followers ought to do? It's a very strange omission. It's not just that this was about oral tradition. It's that the existing records leave no trace that such a man existed until much later.
Robert, we appreciate your commentary there. We are going to make it a show for the evening tonight. Gentlemen, thank you so much for participating in our debate tonight, and we wish you well as you continue to do your research and continue to participate in programs like this. Thank you for being a part of this program tonight, and thank you all out there for watching. All of you that are continuing to watch and support our programming here at ABN and the Trinity Channel Network, which is just getting going this year, or actually late last year, the Trinity Channel, I should say. And I'm Chris Conway, and I welcome participants in our programs and in our debates, and as you support and pray for our ministry here and call in. We welcome you to continue to do that, and we all here at ABN, our staff, just wish everyone here a very, very happy New Year. We're looking forward to exciting times. Gentlemen, thanks so much for participating again, and everyone have a great evening, and we'll catch you next time.